my story that are really typical, and then there are aspects of my story that are atypical.
Come out and represent such a positive, healthy role model of recovery.
We have what we call the Alliance in Billings, which is the 3 major healthcare providers.
The day when he's really alert and can focus on his work. And then somebody this morning talked
into getting the world a better place. And it's both true, because the professionals actually need the resources, the payment structure.
Some of the policies that we are driving are targeting those kinds of issues, but it's not like it's
analogy as opposed to an electrical line analogy, the circuitry and learning.
My name's Joan Daly. I'm a member of NAMI from Billings and also from NAMI, Montana. And I'm here to introduce our next speaker, Jill Bolte Taylor. Dr. Taylor is a trained and published neuroanatomist and is the national spokesperson for the Harvard Brain Bank. She chose to study the human brain because she has a brother who has been diagnosed with a brain disorder, schizophrenia. Dr. Taylor spent 7 years teaching and performing research at Harvard Medical School, and during that time, between the years of 1994 and 1997, she served on the National NAMI Board of Directors. She is now the president of the local affiliate in Bloomington, Indiana, where she teaches neuroanatomy in the Indiana University School of Medicine. 10 years ago, while serving on the National NAMI Board, Dr. Taylor experienced severe hemorrhage in the left half of her brain. At the age of 37, Dr. Taylor could not walk, talk, read, write, or recall any of her life. It took 8 years for Dr. Taylor to completely recover from her mind and body experience, and she has published a book titled My Stroke of Insight, A Brain Scientist's Personal Journey. Welcome to Dr. Taylor.
Thank you. Thank you. Can you hear me okay on this microphone? Excellent. All the way in the back? Excellent. I have to tell you, I look at this wonderful, nice, broad room, and it reminds me of Montana. You know, I come from Indiana, so it would be the other way, and I would be at that end. But this seems appropriate to me because we're in Montana. And I also have to say that in Indiana, we're called the Hoosiers. We're not real sure why, but we like it. And we're very friendly people, but I have to say that you people may even be friendlier than we are. I've been here just since yesterday, and everybody has been so nice. Even when I step my foot out to cross the street as a pedestrian, the cars stop. It must be a law here, right? We don't do that in Indiana. So I'm thrilled to be here, and I have some gifts for our beautiful and wonderful president and his lovely wife. So Gary and Sandy, would you please come up here for a moment? Nicknamed the singing scientist, and because I sing, and I will sing for your brain near the end. But another thing that I do is I create anatomically correct stained glass brains. And so that's what you're looking at up here. And I work with an embroidery company to put anatomically correct stained glass brains on my clothing. And because you can't have too many brains. And so this is for our lovely Sandy.
Oh, thank you. An
Anatomically correct stained glass brain. And this is for our lovely president, Gary. And I do think they will fit you. So thank you so much. You're welcome. You're welcome. They have been wonderful. I have known Sandy and Gary for many years because of National NAMI. In the 90s, between 93 and 96, I was serving on the National Board of Directors for the National NAMI. And I was really having a great time in my life because I have a brother who's been diagnosed with the brain disorder schizophrenia. And he's only 18 months older than I am, so he was my eyes to the world. And when you have a brother who's a year and a half older than you are, they are your constant companion, and they are introducing you to the world. And I recognized at a very early age that my brother's perception of the world and my perception of the world were very different in the way that we chose to interact with our environments. And my brother was not formally diagnosed until he was 31 years old. That's how much denial we were in. I was 29. I was in my doctoral program studying neuroanatomy, specializing in the postmortem investigation of the brain as it relates to schizophrenia at the time that my brother was diagnosed. So, but I come from a highly educated family, and so I want to take a backward step and say, wasn't Lizzie wonderful this morning? Wasn't Lizzie wonderful this morning? To have someone who is as communicative as she is, to be able to come out and represent such a positive, healthy role model of recovery of a psychiatric illness, I thought she did a splendid job. And I look at her as the future leadership of National NAMI. So I look forward to the day that she says, I want your vote for the National Board of Directors. And yeah. I think that that's where she's headed, because she's just so beautifully integrated in our issues. They are her issues. So anyway, I was in the early 90s. I was performing brain research at Harvard Medical School. I spent 2 years in the Department of Neuroscience, and then I went to the Harvard Department of Psychiatry. I'm a PhD. I like being in the lab. I'm not an MD. So I like dissection. I currently teach neuroanatomy at the medical school level, gross anatomy, whole body. Absolutely, the mind and the body are an entity. How we have managed to separate them and say that they have different anatomical structures bewilders me, because they are in constant communication. So today we're going to talk a little bit about the beauty and the resiliency of the brain. We're going to talk about my brain. We're going to talk about your brain. We're going to talk about what I learned when I lost half of my brain. What happened to me was I was performing post-mortem investigation of the brain. I would take brains of individuals, diagnosis, normal control, look at that tissue underneath the microscope, compare that to tissue of individuals with a diagnosis schizophrenia, compare that to tissue diagnosis schizoaffective, compare that with tissue diagnosis bipolar, compare that tissue diagnosis depression, compare that tissue diagnosis anxiety, panic disorder, compare that to tissue OCD. So I was looking at a wide gamut of tissue and trying to understand at a cellular level what's happening in our room. Okay, did you hear that? Okay. And I was looking at a neuroanatomical level, what is anatomically different between my brain, which seemed to be functioning relatively normally, and my brother's brain, which was very caught in hallucination and delusion. So I wanted to understand, because biologically, he and I are the closest thing to one another that exists in the universe. And so what was different about his biology from my biology so that I wasn't having hallucination and he was, and I wasn't having delusion and he was? Why could I take my dreams and I could connect my dreams to a common reality shared by the majority of people and make my dreams come true? Why was it that my brother's dreams could not be connected to a common reality and they instead became delusion, and he ended up with a diagnosis of schizophrenia? So I've been motivated because of my relationship with my brother. The Journey to Recovery, I think, is the best title of all. I have a friend in Texas. I just keynoted down there, and she is diagnosed with schizophrenia, and she is in recovery, and she has a website called expectrecovery.com. I encourage you to go there. expect recovery? Absolutely. Why are we focused on anything else? So today we're going to talk about the brain and what little pearls of wisdom I might be able to share with you from the inside about how your brain might be dealt with in order to have you be able to have more recovery in your life. So I have 2 of these. I've never had this before, because I'm usually all over one of them and I can't get to either of them. So I'm going to run back and forth, at least in the beginning. These 2 structures right here, this red one and this green one, okay? I should have had a trained assistant, huh? So these 2 structures, this red one and this green one. The red one, okay, so this is relatively anatomically correct. After I had my hemorrhage, I had a lot of time on my hands. And I thought the brain was beautiful, and could I create that in glass? And it would be a wonderful art project for me. And so this was why I created Stained Glass Brain. The red dot is called the amygdala. And the amygdala, you have one in each of your temporal lobes, so you have one in each hemisphere, and they're about the size of an almond, shape and size. And the amygdala is asking the question, moment by moment, am I safe? Am I safe? But it's not doing it in language. Your sensory systems are pulling information in through all your sensory receptors. You're processing and integrating that through your spinal cord and into your brain. Your brain is organizing that, and then you're going to have an output as thought, word, or deed action. Thought, word, or deed. So information is coming in through your sensory systems. It's being processed, and it's going to your amygdala, and your amygdala is saying if 98% of the information coming in through my sensory systems feels familiar, I'm safe. We're all sitting here pretty comfortably. You've been in this room before. You've been in a room similar to this. You're in Montana. The building's not shaking. You're feeling okay. Right next to the amygdala is a green structure called the hippocampus. You have 2, one in each hemisphere. The hippocampus is your ability to learn and memorize new information. So here you are, your amygdala is calm, your hippocampus is turned on, and you're capable of learning and memorizing new information. Most of you, right? Some of you are having anxiety. Anxiety is your amygdala saying, I don't feel safe. I don't feel safe. So if your amygdala is high, you've got some adrenaline flushing through your body, your anxiety level is high, and your hippocampus has a harder time focusing. All right? So the relationship between the amygdala and the hippocampus is all about what brain-based learning is about. So if you've heard about brain-based learning for K through 12, and actually in colleges now, you go into an elementary room. They didn't have this when I was there. You go into an elementary room, they've got couches. So the kids can lounge upside down the way they are at home. They have a padded place on the floor so that they can lay down and lounge. Okay, so, and they have curtains on the windows. All of this is in order to help the amygdala be calm, feel that the environment is familiar, and then they can learn with their hippocampus, learn and memorize new information. So all of our relationship with the external world is about the relationship between our amygdala and our hippocampus. So I encourage you to pay attention to your own level of anxiety. When you feel yourself becoming anxious, talk to your amygdala. I think we should all have shirts that say, I love my amygdala. I love my amygdala. Because then we are calm, we are relaxed, we feel safe in the environment, and then we're capable of learning and memorizing new information. So that's really why I put that picture up there. This is the cover of my book. My book is titled My Stroke of Insight. The book itself is divided into really 3 categories, 4 kinda. The first part gives you my credentials. You've already heard them. That's about how long they are in the book too. The next part is a little bit about the brain, because you have to understand just a little bit about how the brain organizes information in the right hemisphere versus the left hemisphere, because they function differently in the way that they process information. In my case, I had a rare form of hemorrhage. It's called an arteriovenous malformation. An arteriovenous malformation, it's the same kind of problem, or AVM, you may be common with that terminology, that Timothy Johnson, our senator in South Dakota, had last year at Christmas time. It's a congenital malformation in the blood vessels and how they're organized inside of the brain. Normally, you have a high-pressure system artery that goes down to a neutral system capillary bed, and then a negative system, venous system, to absorb the fluids back throughout the body. I had an artery directly connected to a vein with no capillary bed in between. I did not know that I had this. This was a bomb waiting to blow in my head. People who have AVMs, they usually blow between the ages of 25 and 45. Mine was right on time. I was 37 years old at the time. So what happened to me on the morning of the hemorrhage was the vein popped off of the artery, and I had a slow bleed begin to happen in the left hemisphere of my brain. This is a rare form of stroke. Statistically, it's not very good. By the end of 48 hours, 50% of the people who have this type of a hemorrhage die within that 48-hour period. 50% die. Of the people who make it till the end of a week, another 50% of those individuals die. Okay? So the blood, when it is released into the brain, kills the neurons, the brain cells, and that's never a good thing, and they shut down. I was very fortunate that my hemorrhage happened up in my cerebral cortex and not down at my brainstem. If it had happened in the level of the brainstem, then I would not be here talking to you today, I'm sure, because that's where respiration happens. So if you have a problem with the brainstem region, that's worse in many ways than life-threatening, more life-threatening than if you just lose your cognition. So we'll talk a little bit about the loss of the cognition. So in the book, you're going to get a little bit of anatomy. Don't let that scare you. It's designed for you. It's designed for the person who doesn't have a lot of anatomy history. So I start at the beginning, and I work you through the process. And then I teach you a little bit about the differences between the right hemisphere and the left hemisphere, because these are two beautiful, beautiful, different brains inside of your head. Usually, when I don't have to get on an airplane to give a presentation, I carry a bucket of brains. And at this moment, I would open my bucket, and you'd all be going, ooh. And your right hemisphere would be going, ooh, this is like really cool. And your left hemisphere would be going, comparing it to something in your past, like maybe roadkill. And you'd be going, ooh, I don't know how I feel about that. But that's the beauty of the brain. I would pull out the brain and show you. My brains have long, beautiful spinal cords because I dissect them like that. They're just beautiful. Beautiful brain. So I'm holding my brain right here, just like this. Can you see? And the right hemisphere, what you will notice is that the right hemisphere is completely different than the left hemisphere. They are completely separate structures. And then they come together, and they have a major highway for information transfer, so that the right hemisphere knows what's going on in the left hemisphere. The left hemisphere knows what's going on in the right hemisphere. But if we take a scalpel and we cut those apart, then essentially there are two of me, totally separate, inside of my mind. This is how we are anatomically, biologically designed. So we all know that we all have ourselves and a counterpiece of ourselves, right? Did you ever wonder when you're yelling at yourself, who's doing the yelling and who you're yelling at? That's what's going on. Did you ever wonder when you're making a decision and your heart is telling you to do one thing and your mind is telling you to do another thing, what is going on? It's the fact that you have two very separate hemispheres inside of your head. On the case of my situation, when I had my hemorrhage, the hemorrhage happened in my left hemisphere. And the left hemisphere is my ability to take a big picture, and then focus on details. And so it thinks in language. We communicate with a detail like language. So anyway, I'm getting ahead of myself. I want to keep going anyway. So I'm going to back up just a touch. This one, I was supposed to show you my amygdala and my hippocampus. You already are experts on that. This is why I do what I do. This is what my brother, diagnosed with schizophrenia, calls his self-portrait. When I look at this picture, it's obvious to me that he sees the world as a dangerous place. His amygdala is not feeling safe. I look at his eyes, and it's obvious he recognizes that he has a skewed perception of the world, but my brother does not recognize he has an illness. Like over 60% of individuals diagnosed with schizophrenia do not have the insight to recognize that they have the illness. My brother is of that population. I see the little bird on his shoulder, and I wonder if that's a voice of hallucination. My brother experiences 24 hours a day what he calls audibles from God. He is in constant communication with Jesus. To me, that is an auditory hallucination. When I look at the little satellite dish on his back, I wonder what kinds of information is my brother perceiving from the external world and from the universe that the rest of us are not processing. So this is why I grew up to be a brain scientist, because of my relationship with my brother. This is a photograph, not a drawing, but a photograph of a real human woman's nervous system. Her name was Harriet, and back in 1888, she donated her body for something very special. And a physician spent 3 months dissecting away all cell types other than her nervous tissue. So this is her nervous system in its complexity to the terminal endings of the nerves going to all of the muscle masses in her extremities. In order for any two of us to communicate with one another, we have to share a certain amount of common reality, which means that your nervous system must be perceiving the same information mine is. We are receiving the same information. We are processing that and integrating that and organizing that in the same way, and then we have the same options for output as thought, word, or deed. Approximately 1 trillion cells, cells make up your typical nervous system. Anybody tell me how many people there are on the planet without looking at the sign? 6 billion. You get a little squeezy brain. You're welcome. See me afterwards. 1 trillion living organisms. We would have to take all the people on the planet, all 6 billion of us, and multiply each one of us 166 times just to make up the number of tiny little living organisms that it takes in order for you to have a nervous system capable of creating a common reality. That's a lot of little bitty cells, okay? I love my cells. I'm always encouraging my cells. On top of just having that 1 trillion, though, we're much bigger than that. We have a bony structure to strap that thing up, the nervous system up. We have muscles in order to move that nervous system out into the world. We have a digestive tract to bring nutrition to all those cells in support of and the nervous system. We have a respiratory system to bring oxygen to all those cells, et cetera, et cetera. A typical human body, your body, is made up of approximately 50 trillion cells. 50 trillion cells. That's 8,333 times all the people on the planet. That's a lot of living organisms. So then you look at each of those cells, and your body came from a single little itty-bitty cell, the zygote cell. The zygote cell was that original DNA combination from your father's sperm and your mother's egg. And that little zygote cell had the molecular genius, the genius to multiply its DNA, to repackage that in a cell, multiply the DNA, package that in a cell, so that every cell in your body contains the exact same molecular genius as that original zygote cell, except for about 100,000 red blood cells, and they don't have that. So I look at myself, and I have a choice. I have a choice of either looking at myself as a single, I'm a single, solid, separate from you, individual. These are my credentials. This is my address, phone number, blah, 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 all the details of who I am. But I am an individual, and I'm separate from you. Or I can stand in front of you, and I can recognize that I am the life force power of 50 trillion molecular geniuses. Hallelujah. And I can live my life like that. And I tell you, there's a big difference in how you present yourself to the world and how the world receives you. when you walk into the world as the life force power of your 50 trillion molecular geniuses. So whatever's going on with the fine circuitry of your brain, whatever's going on with the fine circuitry of your body in any kind of ability or disability, which is purely based on the cells and which cells are working and which cells are not working as they are designed to do, whatever those are, that is the unique power of you. And you always have the right to say, I am the life force power of 50 trillion molecular geniuses. And so are you. And what a difference it makes in your life when you treat other people like that. And what a difference that makes in your life when other people treat you like that. So I'm going to encourage you to all remember, and when you get out of here, I want someone's going to say, hi, how are you today? And you're going to say, I am the life force power of 50 trillion molecular geniuses. And they're going to go, whoa, I want some of that. Yeah. It's a very nice way to live your life. So this is a picture of a brain. I travel around, I talk about the brain. I'm a neuroanatomist. I think it's a beautiful thing made up of beautiful cells. I call this my belly up brain. I put this in here because it's the cutest picture of a brain I've ever seen. A lot of people are intimidated by the subject of the brain. So I just want you to look at that picture and say, you know, it's just a brain and it's a beautiful, beautiful thing. A belly up brain. So a typical human brain is divided into two hemispheres. Here you can see clearly the difference between the right hemisphere, which is up on top, and the left hemisphere, which is down below. All of the pictures of the brains are designed so that the front is pointing that way, and the back of the brain is directing that way. What you're looking at is the cerebral cortex. The bumps on the cerebral cortex, your bumps are just like my bumps. It is as though there was a big cerebral cortex piece of paper and our genetic code said, fold that up just the right way, like origami, if you will, in order to fit it inside of your cranium. So that you and I have exact same organization to our bumps. The bumps are called the gyri. The lines in between are called the sulci. You never know when you need that kind of information. You want to go home and you want to impress. What did you learn today when your hippocampus was fine and your amygdala was calm? I learned about the gyri and I learned about the sulci. But there you can see the right hemisphere is completely separate from the left hemisphere. And then you're going to have this big major part that's shaped kind of like an ear right here. Oh, this works lovely. Right here. And that's going to be the corpus callosum. And right above that is the cingulate gyrus. And the cingulate gyrus is part of the limbic system. And the limbic system places emotion onto information coming in. And so when we look at the severe mental illnesses, we're looking at the limbic system and what's going on with those cells and how are those different in different people with different diagnoses. And what we find is that especially in this region of the anterior cingulate gyrus up here, that's your ability to pay attention. There are cells in your brain that help you take this moment and connect it to the last moment and connect it to a few moments in the past in order for you to be able to have the ability to pay attention. And when I lost my left hemisphere, I lost all ability to have any recollection of the past, and all I had was the present moment. So none of my cells were really cooperating very well. So this is that cingulate gyrus. And when you look at this, right down here, I want you to notice this structure. This is a blood vessel. So dipping down in front, look at the little blood vessel. The thing about the blood vessels, this is kind of fun, I tell you. I wish I had a pedometer. The thing about the blood vessels is that they are transparently thin in the brain. So that if I were holding my brain up here, you would be seeing a bunch of blood vessels that were blue, and that would be the blood in the vessels. So stroke is the #1 disabler in our society. It's the #3 killer in our society. And part of the problem is that we have such transparently thin blood vessels, so that the pressure system of what's going on inside of the brain is really coordinated with what's going on in the thorax, what's going on in the abdomen. So any major pressure systems, blood pressure included, is going to have a profound impact on what's going on at the level of that brain. So that's why it's really important that you pay very close attention if you have a high blood pressure issue. So this is what a beautiful postmortem brain tissue looks like. This is what you want your brain to look like, inside of your head, of course. Yeah, preferably. The bumps, the gyri, are very thick and robust. The lines in between the sulci are very, very narrow. So that's what you want your brain to look like. But of course, the brain is made up of of those trillion cells. 800 million of those cells are called the neurons. And the neurons is a typical neuron. And a neuron in the green there is connecting to as many as 15,000 other cells. So take 800 million cells and connect each of those to 15,000 cells, and you've got a big conversation going on inside of your head, right? The neurons are separate from one another, just like I'm separate from you, but I can communicate with you using my language. My language is English in the creation of sound. Their language is across the synaptic gap, and they use a neurochemical, primarily the neurotransmitters. So the neurotransmitters is the language system of the brain. And any medication that we put into the brain is going to influence one of those neurotransmitter systems. GABA, glutamate, serotonin, dopamine. These are some of the most common neurotransmitter systems. You may take a medication that is going to increase or decrease the impact of a specific or a delicate interplay of neurotransmitter systems using the newer atypical medications. So the right hemisphere and the left hemispheres are both kind of similarly organized, so that the frontal region is your ability to have self-motivation. You wake up in the morning and you say, ooh, it's another wonderful day. My 50 trillion molecular geniuses, who knows what's coming? Let's go explore the world. Isn't that how you all wake up? Tomorrow morning, I want you to try that. It'll stick with you the whole rest of the day. It's really a lovely way to look at it. It's your self-motivation. It's your appropriateness of behavior. It's your ability to pay attention. How many of you are paying attention? Okay, beautiful. And for those of you who are not, you are appropriately behaving so that I can't tell. And I always appreciate that. So we're all using our frontal lobe, just maybe different skills. We have skill sets. The occipital region in the back, that's visual. So what your eyes are doing is you are bringing in a field, a visual field, which is filled with billions of pixels. And every pixel spot is filled with an atom or molecule that is in vibration. And the cells at the back of your retina are tuning in to the vibration of those molecules out there, and they are bringing them into the occipital region at the back. And the first thing that's being decided is, let's package these vibrations together in an edge, a tiny little edge, and it's evaluating the edge or the orientation of that edge. So you can look at the world and actually you're seeing all these billions of edges. And then your brain is sending the information from one group of cells to another group of cells. And then the next group of cells is processing that and building a bigger picture. And then another set of cells is going to place color on it. And then another group of cells is going to add 3-dimension to it. And then another group of cells is going to be able to process movement in the world. And it's happening like this, and it's taking hundreds of thousands of cells in your brain in order to do that. If you should lose the function of any of those groups of cells, then you lose the function, the ability. You may lose a group of cells because of stroke. You may lose a group of cells that can understand movement. And so your eyes are not capable anymore of tracking movement and recording that inside of your mind. You might lose the ability to experience color. It's there, but you don't see it, and you can't use it as a tool because those cells are no longer functioning. You might lose the ability to experience 3-dimension if you lose those cells and the cognitive ability in order to understand 3-dimension. So all these different groups of cells have different skill sets, and everything that you are capable of doing or are not capable of doing, you can blame on a group of cells inside of your brain. The temporal region then, deep inside, that's going to be your amygdala for fear and rage, anxiety. hippocampus for learning and memory, and audition, any information coming in as you listen to my voice, you're using your temporal lobe. And then humans, we have a very large parietal region, and that is an association and integration of all the different sensory systems so that they all meld together as a single image. But the right and the left hemispheres are unique in the kinds of information they process. The left hemisphere is about the details. Picture yourself, and you can do this easily in Montana, because one of the beauties of living in Montana are your vistas. You live in a beautiful place. And just walking through the city of Missoula, stepping out and having the traffic stop, just do it sometime while you're here. You know, it's like my 50 trillion molecular geniuses are showing their power. It was beautiful. So the vista, the big picture, the big open view, the big picture of everything is what the right hemisphere does. And so as you just stand in the middle of the town and you look up at those beautiful, do you call them mountains or are they hills? What do you call them? Mountains, those beautiful mountains. We don't have these things in Indiana. These beautiful mountains. And you just feel vast and open, and there's a freedom feeling, and there's a joy and a oh my gosh, we're as big as the universe, and don't we live in a beautiful place, and you know, that celebration, that joy, that's your right hemisphere. And then the left hemisphere is going to take that big picture, and it's going to start looking at, oh, are those pine trees up there, and where do the trees begin, and where do they end, and is that snow up there, and what kind of clouds are in the sky? So the right hemisphere takes the big picture, and the left hemisphere takes the details, and then it gives you language to communicate with. So the left hemisphere is where our language cells are. The right hemisphere thinks in pictures. So I have this memory of being in Colorado recently, and I looked out over the mountains, and again, that big vista. Or when I'm walking on the beach in Texas, and I'm looking out over the ocean, and that same big picture. So that's the right hemispheres, the big picture, and the left hemispheres taking those details, because in our world, details are power. So we take those details, and certain cells in our brain pick that apart so that we have that information, and then we can communicate it with the world. So we have these two hemispheres that are very different, very unique, but they're processing similar but different kinds of information. In this left hemisphere, in Broca's area, in the frontal, this is my ability to create sound with my throat. And then the left, back in the back, in the temporal region, in Wernicke's area, it's the ability for me to say, dog, dog. Dog is a sound, and it's a sound then that your brain places a meaning on the sound dog. So how many of you, when I say dog, you think of a specific dog you know? Or a specific kind of dog you know? That's your left hemisphere. It's taking a detail. It's breaking down into a categorizing or a very specific piece of information. How many of you, when I say dog, you think of, you have a picture of a dog flash in your mind? That's your right hemisphere. So the right hemisphere and the left hemisphere are working together, processing the same kinds of information, but they're doing it differently. In the left hemisphere, of course, motor-wise and sensory-wise, commands the right half of the body. And the right hemisphere controls the motor and the sensory in the left half of the body, because those fibers down in the brainstem region cross over. So that's set, and they're very similar. Right here, in this region of the brain, it's called the orientation association cortex. You have another one over here, but it does things a little bit differently. In the left hemisphere, this is your ability to say, this is where I begin, and this is where I end. You have a physical boundary. You have a boundary of the skin, and the skin is really, and what you are made up of molecules and atoms. Out here, molecules and atoms. How do you know that you begin and end right there, and that these molecules and atoms are different from these molecules and atoms? The only way you know that is because a group of cells inside of your left hemisphere tell you so. The right hemisphere takes that package that the left hemisphere has defined as you, this is me, and it says, here's space, here's me, that's separate from me. I want to position myself on this table comfortably, without breaking it. And I'm capable of doing that because of the cells in my right hemisphere. If I lose the cells in my left hemisphere, I do no longer begin and end here. I become as big as the universe. My perception of myself is that I am where everything else is. I am at one with all that is. In the left hemisphere, if I lose my right hemisphere orientation center, but I still know where I begin and where I end, I cannot take me and organize me against the space, and even though I might want to end up on the table, I might end up upside down against the wall, okay? Because of the cells in my brain are telling my body, communicating to me information about me as an entity. The cells in my brain, when they're functioning well, perform a certain function. If I lose those cells, or those cells are in a confusing circuit that it was not designed to be in, then it will still have a functional experience, but it will not be a normal one. Or if I have a hemorrhage and I lose those cells, I lose the function of those cells altogether. So the differences in the right hemisphere and the left hemisphere are critically important when you're thinking about what's actually going on in the brain. Which cell packages are working well and which ones are having problems. So this just shows exactly what I said with the right hemisphere as opposed to the left hemisphere. So the two hemispheres are using the same basic information, but they're processing it differently. Now, in our society, in the United States, stroke happens 4 times more commonly, more frequently, in the left hemisphere. So if something happens to the left hemisphere, there are 3 major arteries that come and feed the cerebral cortex of each hemisphere. The anterior, the middle cerebral, and the posterior cerebral. Depending on where the blood stroke, the blood clot, or the hemorrhage happens, is going to have a very specific experience of symptoms based on our brain organization. So for me, my stroke happened deep inside of my temporal lobe region, and this other picture shows how complex the arterial system is in there. And I had major problem there. Hemorrhage began inside of there, and it was the left hemisphere. And right where the pointer is pointing is language. So I lost the ability to understand language. I lost the ability to create language. I permanently lost the ability, the only cells that actually died in my brain, everybody else got totally traumatized in that left hemisphere, was my ability to understand mathematics. Mathematics is a language. 1 + 1 = whatever. So people would say to me, and this was literally for 4 years, people would say to me, and my mother was a mathematics college professor, I have to throw that in there, and she would say to me, Jill, what's 1 + 1? And I'd go hunting, and I'd go hunting, and I'd say, what's a 1? I didn't understand the concept of 1. And I was at 1 with all that was because I lost that part of my brain. And so if I was at 1 with all that was, how could there be another one? And then if you put that one with the other one, what did you have? I didn't have anything. So it was 4 years before I had any concept about what a 1 was. And eventually, it was 4.5 years, I got back the ability to add, subtract, multiply. Division took a little bit longer. It was very complicated. This is a picture, a CAT scan on the morning of my hemorrhage. So the white blob down there in the left hemisphere does not belong there. That was my blood clot. On the morning of the stroke, I had a hemorrhage the size of my fist. 2.5 weeks later, the surgeons went in. I had major brain surgery, and they pulled out a golf ball-sized blood clot that was pressed up against my language centers, blocking any kind of information flow. So on the morning of the stroke, I could not walk, talk, read, write. I had no recollection of my life. I was essentially an infant in a woman's body. So I'm going to take you through a little bit of the morning of the stroke. And a lot of people say, Jill, how is it you remember the morning of the stroke if you lost your mind? And, you know, the beauty was that I only lost half my mind. You know, I only lost the half that communicates with you people. But that came back. I retained the ability to think in pictures. So I had a movie going in my mind. And after the stroke, a couple of months after the stroke, I worked with a Gestalt therapist, psychologist. And I spent an entire weekend with her, and we videotaped the entire sessions. But she helped me. I reenacted the morning of the stroke. And she helped me document it with language. So that was the only way that I would be able to communicate to other people the process by process of what I went through. And I take you through the morning of the stroke in the book, and it's quite dramatic. You go moment by moment with everything that I was thinking, and through that entire process of deterioration. So on the morning of the stroke, I woke up and I had a pounding behind my left eye. And I've always taken pretty good care of my body, so I had a normal exercise regime. And so, but it was this pounding, and then it would release. And then it would pound. And it was like biting into ice cream pain. You know that pain that you get behind your eyes? And it was just like, oh, and then it would release me. And then it would, oh, and it was just like, oh. So I got up and I turned down the lights because the light was like fire, starting really, really painful to my eyes. And sound was painful. All stimulation was painful. But I got up and I got onto my cardiac glider. Now, a cardiac glider is one of these whole body exercise machines. And I'm jamming away to Shania Twain. You know, it was not a boring exercise routine. And I'm looking at my hands, and I'm realizing with my hands on this bar that they look like claws. They look like claws. And my consciousness had shifted out of me being the active participant to observing. I was still in my body, but I was observing myself through a different perception. It was as though my mind had shifted out of my normal reality into some esoteric space, observing. And I'm looking at my claws, and I'm thinking, you know, this is not helping. So I thought so I get off my machine, and I'm walking across my living room on my way to the shower, and I'm realizing that every movement in my body was very rigid and purposeful. There was no more fluidity to my movement. And I thought, okay, well, this is interesting. And I get into my shower area, and okay, so I get into the shower area, and I'm getting ready to get into, I don't mean to neglect you over there. I get into my shower area, and I'm reaching my leg up. And as I'm picking up my leg, I'm realizing that there's a constriction in my perception of the world around me. And it's as though I could hear my cells saying, okay, you muscles, you got to contract. And oh, you muscles, you got to relax. And oh, she's going to go over, you got to catch her. And it's a very peculiar experience because the more tuned into my body and its own form of communication, everything got really slowed down. And I lean up against the wall, and as I look down at myself, I realize that I cannot distinguish where I begin and where I end. And it was really peculiar. And I was born in '59, so I missed the drug scene. At this point, someone usually says, that sounds like LSD. I don't know, I wasn't there. But this was my experience. So the same kind of thing. And so as I realized this, it was, I'm asking myself, I'm a neuroanatomist, I'm asking myself, this is really weird. Am I okay? What's going on with my body? What's going on with my brain? Have I ever had an experience like this before? So I realized that everything was closing in, a constricted area. So I sensed a constriction in my area of observation. And as I'm looking at myself, I realized that we all have a little radio program going on in our heads. That's normal. If you didn't know that, that's normal. And it's always, running the propaganda of your life, and it's giving all kinds of information. And it's the little voices that say, oh, you got to pick bananas up on your way home from business because you're out. Or it's a little calculating intelligence that says, oh, I really got to do laundry this weekend because I'm out of socks or whatever. But it's just that constant chatter, that brain chatter. And it was as though I'm leaning up against the wall, and all of a sudden my brain went silent. And it was like somebody hit the mute button on my brain. And I noticed it, because you notice when it goes away. You might not think so much about it when it's there because it's just this kind of constant thing that's going on and keeping you abreast. Did you ever wonder when you get up in the morning and you look at yourself in your mirror that you know what your name is? Did you ever wonder? How do I know what my name is? Yeah, and it's talking to you. Your mind is constantly telling you, my name is Jill, this is where I live, this is my phone number. It's constantly telling you. And that little voice was just on mute. And then it would come back online, and I'd noticed that it was there for a while, and it started, la, 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 and then it went mute again. And so it was very peculiar. It was as though the circuitry was like functioning and then not functioning, and it was short-circuiting itself. So my normal brain chatter became intermittent, and I lost that, and that was at the same time then that I had lost my ability to discriminate my boundaries. Now I have to tell you that as you begin to lose your mind, at least when I did, it was kind of exciting. Because I was a brain scientist. And my whole life, I had been studying the brain through books. And I had even been out in the world talking about how our brain creates our perception of reality and the beauty and the resiliency of the brain. This was pre-stroke, right? So I kind of feel like the universe really wanted me to get it right. And so I had this little opportunity to study my brain. And so this stuff is happening to me. And imagine what it would be like to all of a sudden have the silence happen in your mind. Now, when the silence happens, you're losing your communication about the world and your life with the world. So the little voices that were saying, okay, you've got this presentation in a couple of weeks, you got to get ready for that, and oh, you got this poster session you got to do, and you got this experiment that you're supposed to be at work for in 2 hours in order to run, and and any of your emotional baggage from your life, it's all because it's always right there, you know, ready for little triggers, ready for everybody to jump on, and all of that stuff went quiet. And in the silence, there was this bliss. Because all I had was the moment. And I didn't have my connections to the past. I didn't have my connections to the stress. I didn't have my connections to anything other than this present moment. And I call this La La Land because it was really delightful. And I have to say that it was very enticing. Okay, and then I'd have this little wave of clarity and I'd start to freak out, oh my God. But then I would come right back into La La Land. And so La La Land was a very nice experience for me. It was kind of an experience of euphoria. I turned the water on in order to have a shower, and as soon as I pulled that water, it bammed into the tub, and it was so loud in my ears, and it was just this chaotic noise, and I thought, oh my gosh. And in this moment, I began to take what was going on really seriously, because audition passes through the brainstem. And I knew that if I was having a brainstem problem, then that was life-threatening, and I had to get help. So it's like, help, okay, I've got to get help. But I kept forgetting what it was I was trying to do. And so I get out of the shower, and I dress mechanically, and I'm walking around my apartment, and I'm thinking, drive. Got to drive to work. Where do I work? I work at the brain bank. Oh, I work at the brain bank. Drive. Can I drive? And I visualized the road to McLean Hospital, where I worked, and in that instant, my right arm went totally paralyzed. Thud. Bam. My brain says, oh my gosh, I'm having a stroke. Oh my gosh, I'm having a stroke. The next thing it says is, wow, this is so cool. I was so lucky. Fortunately, wherever the amygdala was, it was not freaking out. And so it was like, it was okay. Wow. What am I trying to do? What am I trying to do? So I kept forgetting what it was I was trying to do. And then, and so it was like, okay, I got to set a plan. I got to get a plan. What's a plan? Well, why people say, why didn't you just call 911? 911 was floating in a little pool of blood. It was gone. My landlady lived right downstairs. She was home on maternity leave. She'd have been happy to take me to the hospital. She didn't exist for me anymore. It wasn't there. I had a plan, and the plan was to call work. What's the number at work? What's the number at work? And so I knew I had a business card because I couldn't remember the number. And it didn't matter that I'd been singing, just dial 1-800-BRAIN-BANK for information, please. For years prior to this, it was gone, all right? So singing, it was gone. So I remembered I had a business card, and I have the cutest little brains, of course, on my business card. And I could picture it in my mind, and so I went to my desk, and I pull out this 3-inch stack of business cards, And I'm looking at it, and in looking at it, I'm realizing that I cannot discriminate the pixels of the letters and the words from the pixels of the symbols from the pixels of the background. It's just a bunch of pixels. Even though it clearly in my mind's eye, I can visualize my business card, but I can't look at that one and see if that matches it or not. So I couldn't get what was in here to match what was out there. So at this point, I'm going to say to you, and I'm going to go through the warning signs of stroke at the end. If you experience any warning signs of stroke, pick up the phone as soon as you can and call for help. Call 911. If you can't remember, call 911, or you're not quite ready to call 911 because that tingling might be, you know, might just be it's asleep or whatever. Call a friend. Pick up the phone and call a friend and say, I'm having a little neurological weirdness. We all know what that feels like. I'm having a little neurological weirdness. Call me back in 10 minutes, you know, and talk to me in 10 minutes. Just make sure I'm okay. See how I am. Check in on me. But reach out before it's too late, because I was so far debilitated. And it is just such a miracle that I'm here at all. Hi, how are you?
In 2003, I had what they call a TIA. What's the difference between a TIA
And what I had? The question is, what's the difference between a TIA and a stroke? A TIA is a small blood clot passing into the brain. And then within 24 hours, the nerves are back to normal and there's no more symptomology. A full-blown stroke is if a bigger clot passes into that artery and then you have symptoms for longer than that 24-hour period of time. Okay? So anyway, reach out and call someone. So I'm looking at these business cards, and it took me literally 45 minutes to get an inch into that stack. So I would go out into La La Land, and then I would have what I call a wave of clarity, and it would pull me back to reality. That's not the card, that's not the card, that's not the card. And then I would go off into La La Land again. And then I would come back, that's not the card, that's not the card. Eventually I found the little brain, and I took that card and I put the phone right next to it, and I had to match the squiggles. I didn't understand numbers anymore, but I had to match the squiggle, and then I had to cover it up in order to know that I had already dialed that one, because I was off in La La Land again during that process. By the time, I was so blessed that my colleague was at his desk. He answers the phone and he says to me, "Rrr, rrr, rrr." And I think, oh my gosh, he sounds like a golden retriever. And so I say to him, "Rrr, rrr, rrr, rrr." I think, oh my gosh, I sound like a golden retriever. I did not know I could not understand language or create language until I tried. In my mind's eye, I could clearly hear myself say, this is Jill and I need help. And that is not what came out, okay? So even though I thought I was communicative, I was not. So where am I at? I lost the ability to understand speech, create normal speech. When I lost language, I lost the I. My ability to say I is language. I am. And when I am, then I have a file of I am this, and I am that, and I am all these things. I am an entity separate from you. And when I lost the I am, I shifted away from the single into a cognitive approach to I am at one with all that is. And so it shifted me into a knowingness that we are. And in the we are a human family on this beautiful planet, trying to make the world a better place, helping one another, supporting one another. We are all equal members of this human family. And as a result of that, I'm connected with you. And so you're a part of me. And it's like my 50 trillion cells gained 6 billion more. Because now I had all of you, and each of you had your 50 trillion, and I haven't done that calculation. I think I should do that, because it gave me that consciousness that we are this incredible life force power on the planet. When I lost the left hemisphere, I lost all linearity to my thinking because I lost the past. I lost the past, my relationship to the past. I lost the future. The right hemisphere brings in information as a collage. So in this moment, when you have a moment in your life that you will remember for the rest of your life. I was an itty-bitty, like 3-year-old when President Kennedy died. I remember that experience. I hate to admit this I remember where I was when I found out Elvis died. You know, Elvis was important to me. I was of that era. I was kind of at the tail end of it, but he was cool. He was cute, and he was fun, and he was cool. So that was trauma to me, but I remember sitting in my Ford Torino right at that intersection going, oh my God, on the radio, Elvis just died. Those kinds of collage memories that you have is your right hemisphere. It's taking in all the perceptions, all building this big collage of what life is in this moment and packaging that up and holding it. The left hemisphere then takes that information and it relates it to your past, and it creates loops of knowledge, and then you can project yourself into the future. And what I realized was that as a living being, I was this incredible bridge across time. I was a bridge across time. You know, we think that, oh yeah, we're alive and we live for X number of years and blah, blah, blah. But did you ever really stop and think, oh my gosh, I am the cellular life that is designed to not just exist in this moment, but to be able to span up to a century. And that the cells in my body, most of those neurons, are going to be the same cells that I was born with. And so I have cells in my body that are as old as I am. And I have muscle cells that are as old as I am. And otherwise, cells are rejuvenating themselves and living and dying and recreating what I am. I am a dynamic example of life. Of course, I have the ability to recover. Of course. I have the ability to recreate anything I can imagine. I loved it when Lizzie spoke today about having a vision statement for where you want to be and how you want to get there. Put it in your mind and hold on to it and do what you need to do moment by moment in order to create what you want to create. So I really walked away from that morning. Well, I curled up into a little fetal ball. Well, I got help. My friend came. He picked me up. I ought to make you just go buy the book. Now, I'll tell you, I curled up into a little fetal ball. He came and he rescued me. They gave me the CAT scan. They shipped me across Boston to Mass General Hospital. I curled up into a little fetal ball in the ambulance. I was all covered up to block my sensory systems. And I felt my spirit surrender. That's the only way I can phrase it. I had slowed to the point of no communication. I was done. I did what I did in order to orchestrate my rescue. I felt my spirit surrender. Within moments, I'm at Mass General Hospital in this bustling beehive, and it's like, oh my gosh. But it was, you know, they either save me and give me a second chance at life, or they don't. And it didn't matter. I was in La La Land. I was experiencing this euphoric experience of bliss, so that was fine with me. Of course, they obviously, positive things happened. The next part of the book is going to take you into the recovery. So I'll give you a little bit of recovery. Well, there's the hemorrhage. There's a stroke. Ugh, that's pretty much what it felt like. I'm very proud of that. My friends call me bowling ball head because I have 3 really big drill holes in there, but that's a beautiful 9-inch scar. So they removed that. I had to have that surgery in order to stand the chance of recovery. They had to get rid of the debris, the leftover blood that didn't belong in there. So I have, I take you through recovery. I take you through the choices that I had to make in order to recover. I was so detached from everything that nothing had any power over me anymore except for me. And I had no history, so I didn't even know what a mother was, much less who mine was. So even that bond was broken for me. And I wasn't happy, actually, that I was alive, because I had watched my brain organically deteriorate. And through the eyes of a neuroscientist, to know that I have this brain that is no longer capable of sustaining the kind of life that I had led, it was like, well, what do I do with this? What do I do with this? So I wasn't necessarily pleased that I was still alive and in this condition. So for me, I had to change my attitude from, why do I have to go back? Why do I have to recover? Because the world outside of me was very fast. We live 1,000,000 miles an hour. And when you have a mind that doesn't work normally or doesn't tune into normal reality, it takes a while for us to get around to what you're thinking about. Or I've already had 18 thoughts since the last time we you know, in the flash of a few seconds. So how fast we think is something that I think we need to talk more about in NAMI, actually, because the speed of thought of mania means that I've had 18 thoughts in the meantime since I asked you that question just a moment ago, and you're still way back there, and I'm sorry, I'm way out here. And so we're not really communicating with one another. Or if I'm in the condition that I was in, I wasn't capable of adhering to you and understanding you, so it might take 24 hours or 36 hours if I was ever going to get back that ability to ever get back and get an answer to that particular question. So, I think that was very important. On the biggest difference, I think it's important that we treat people as though they're going to recover completely. You have a beautiful brain in your head. You know, I don't care what your diagnosis is. I don't care what your symptoms have been. What I do care about is that your brain is an actively dynamic structure that is undergoing change moment by moment. Some dendrites are being retracted in. New dendrites are creating new neural pathways. And only you really have a relationship with what's going on inside of your head. So I encourage you to pay attention to what your brain does really well. If you're good at tracking movement, hey, that's a big thing. Celebrate it. Say, you go, girls. It's important. Well, you know, if you're not wearing glasses yet, or if you can distinguish color, you know, whatever it is, talk to yourselves, encourage them. I needed people to treat me like I would recover completely. Of course, I was completely disabled, but the people who really made a difference in my life, they were the ones who came up to me and they said, "You're Jill. You're going to be okay." They didn't say in a year or 2 years or 5 years or 20 years or a lifetime, but they said, "You're Jill, you're going to be okay." And they didn't define for me what okay was. They let me define that. But they believed in me, and they believed in my willingness and my ability to try. We honored the healing power of sleep. And I have to say that I think that sleep is one of the most neglected basic needs in our society. And we were very different. I was very blessed that my mother came into my life. She took over my world, and she brought me back. But what she did was, in the beginning, I would be asleep for 12 hours, and I would be awake for maybe 20 minutes. And then I'd be asleep for 12 hours. And then in those 20 minutes, she would take me to the bathroom, she would feed me, and if I had energy, any energy left over, she worked me. She gave me something to do. She conserved my energy, and she focused me. And in our society, especially with stroke recovery, if you go into a nursing home, they will generally give you amphetamines at 7 o'clock in the morning to wake you up. They will prop up your body. They will stick a noise box in your face, and they want you to be up and erect and act like a normal human being until 5 o'clock or 6 o'clock at night. And in the meantime, you're on total overstimulation. You're totally sleep deprived, and all your brain wants to do is shut out stimulation and heal itself. So whatever's going on with your brain, I don't care if you have a diagnosis or not, my doctor's prescription to you is pay attention to your sleep. And when your body says, "I'm tired," go to sleep. Let your brain go to sleep. It's time for your brain to shut out more stimulation, and it's filing time. In my opinion, it's filing time, and I had to file all the stimulation I had experienced. So whatever your story is, you know what your desk looks like if you haven't filed in a week or a month or a year. Imagine what your brain's like. It's like all over the place. You want to help establish structure. We needed to challenge my systems immediately. And so in order to do that, I had to be rested. Because if I wasn't rested, I was a zombie and I had a headache and I was no good to anybody. So we really paid close attention to what we had to do. I needed people to love me for who I am now. We actually mourned and grieved the death of that Dr. Jill Bolte Taylor. We had to do that because she was living large. She was a whole different human being than whom I had become now. And it didn't matter. I couldn't have that as my goal because that's like jumping from A to Z. I end up being 10 years later very much like her, but I'm very different in that now I am much more compassionate. I am much more connected to people. I am no longer in the lab. Instead, I am out in the public talking to the population about the beauty of of the brain. So I have shifted, but we needed to mourn the loss of her, let her be gone, and let me grow up now to be whoever I turn out to be now. That was critically important. I needed people to help me define my energy priorities, because I had this much energy in a day, and normal life, just being a bum, takes this much energy. So I needed this much energy. We had to focus that. We had to figure out what's my priorities. My number one priority was to get my voice back, to get my language back, because I had a story. And I thought if I ever recover, I've got a heck of a story that I want to be able to share with people. And that was really important to me, to be able to communicate with people. Okay, if I couldn't read again, that was fine. If I could never do math again, that was fine. Whatever I couldn't, well, that was fine. But I had to have my priorities. And I needed people to help me with that. We needed to focus on my ability today. What could I do today that I couldn't do yesterday? And I was very blessed to have my mother, who had all of her friends calling and saying, what's going on in your life? And I was making such great progress day by day by day. If I could roll over, we celebrated I could roll over. I mean, I couldn't roll over the day before. And if you got to roll yourself up and then sit up, she's sitting up. It's like, I was very blessed. We focused on what is there to celebrate, what is good. Focus on the good. Make a list of your abilities. Focus on the abilities. We needed to give my brain years to recover, and I was very fortunate that the neurologist said it's going to be at least 2 years before we have any clue about what she's going to get back or what she's not going to get back. It's going to be at least 2 years. Don't even think about it or worry about it. Just go recover. And so I was very fortunate with that, because most folks say, if you don't have it back by 6 months, forget it, you're not going to get it back. And I am living proof that is not true. 8 years. It took me 8 years, and I can document what I gained in each of those 8 years of the development process. And I think I would still be doing it, but I felt like after 8 years I was completely recovered in ability. Divide every task into smaller steps. You think it's easy to just go outside and walk across the yard, but I had to have somebody tell me, well, those cracks right there in that sidewalk, those don't matter. You can step on those. That's okay. Okay. And then, but these cracks over here, now those are important, because if you step on that wrong, you can twist your ankle. And it's like, okay, but I had to be taught this. And then when you step into grass has a different texture, and so you have to watch your balance when you get into the grass, because it's different. So all of these little things that we take for granted, I had to be taught. And it's like you can't jump from A to Z. You have to go, you have to roll over before you can sit up. And you have to sit up before you can push yourself up. And then you have to push yourself up and probably fall over a few times before you can walk. So it's, again, each of those steps. And so whatever deficit you may find that you've got going on inside of your brain, ask yourself, how do I get from where I'm at to where I want to be? And then break down that into a plan so that you have some organization. I'm not stupid. I'm wounded. I'm wounded. You're not stupid. You're not stupid. You're wounded. There's something going on in the neural circuitry inside of your brain. We need people to treat us with the same grace and the same respect. The 20th time they teach us something is the first. Because if I'm not getting it in those 20 times, it means I'm not cognitively capable of getting it. You might need to back up a little and figure out what the previous steps are in order for me to understand that. So I needed people to treat me with that respect. I'm not stupid. And I needed people to come close and be afraid of me. And so many people in our society, they go away from people that they cannot communicate with because they cannot communicate with them. But that doesn't mean you can't find things that you have in common. Or my mother had a best friend who had a stroke, and I said, Gigi, go read her a book. You're not going for a conversation. You're going to be loving to her. You're going to just be with her, to give her your positive energy. So go read a book with her. And she ended up reading a big old fat Harry Potter to her, and then they went to the movie. That took a lot of time, but it was a good, loving, constructive way to spend time with somebody. Okay, and I'm not deaf. When you're dealing with someone who's in stroke, I'm not deaf. I'm wounded. Raising your voice doesn't happen. And we all know that to be true. Okay, now we get to the fun stuff. This is why I'm here today. These are the lessons I learned as a neuroanatomist. So to me, what time is it? Anybody know? 12 o'clock. When are you throwing me out? You're throwing me out now, but that just got to the good stuff. Give me 5 minutes. Notice I have 2 5s. I am neurocircuitry. I have thought neurocircuitry that runs in my cortex. I have emotional neurocircuitry that runs in my limbic system. I have physiological circuitry that runs in the core of who I am, and it's communicated through hormones in my blood system. My left hemisphere thinks thoughts. My right hemisphere thinks thoughts. My left hemisphere has emotional feeling about the past. My right hemisphere has emotional feeling about the present. And they all feed into my physiology in the center. So I have the ability, I can think a thought, I can feel a feeling, and I have the conscious ability to pay attention to the thoughts and the feelings going on in my body. I can think a thought, I can feel the neural circuitry, it runs in my emotions, I can feel the surge of adrenaline in my body, I can feel it flush in of me, surge through me, and flush out of me. I have the ability. And so do you. You have the ability to pay attention to every thought you're thinking, pay attention to what emotions it's triggering, and pay attention to what physiology it's running inside of you. And I encourage you to do that. The more conscious you are about the circuitry, the more control you have in what circuits you try to run. Any physiological circuit that automatically runs, whether it's your anxiety, whether it's your sadness, whether it's your fear, it takes 90 seconds for that physiology to run through your body and flush out of you. I call it the 90-second rule. You can feel it, you can time it. Next time you're angry, I'm going to encourage you to don't go off in the anger. Look at your watch. Look at your watch. Feel it coming on and look at your watch. In 90 seconds, it will be gone from your body. You make the choice to rehook into that loop, to rethink those thoughts, to re-stimulate that emotion, to re-stimulate that physiology, and to get mad again. You make the choice. The right hemisphere thinks very differently than the left hemisphere. The right hemisphere it's about the present. You're in the flow. You're feeling compassionate. You look for similarities in people. You feel merciful. You feel that you're a fluid and recognize you're the power of 50 trillion molecular geniuses. You're non-confrontational. You're joyful. You're prayerful. Things in the present moment, the right hemisphere. The left hemisphere puts you in the past. It puts you in the future. There's a clock that sits and ticks in the back of your left hemisphere. Some of us are really good at saying, brain, wake me up tomorrow at 6:30, and boy, it'll wake you up on the button. That's your left hemisphere. It's critically analyzing. It's looking for differences. It's being judged. It sees me as a solid separate from you. The right hemisphere consciousness is very different than the left hemisphere consciousness. I encourage you to step to the right as often as possible. That's what I call it, stepping to the right. And it's a choice, moment by moment by moment. Any situation happens. You come into my life, you say something to me, I feel you stepping on my little trigger of anger. I feel my anger, I'm thinking, what is this? This is my beautiful anger circuitry. I watch my clock, 90 seconds later it's gone. I have stepped to the right. I have chosen to not bump my stuff up against yours and to run my anger circuitry. I have chosen to observe you, to celebrate what's going on, but to be in control of who I am and what I am. I choose to observe and interact with my peanut gallery. It's those little voices in there that are telling us all this stuff. It is designed to take this piece of information and this piece of information and start telling stories. So it's the storyteller. Sometimes it goes into catastrophe and it can really work me up. Oh, but what if? And oh my gosh, it's probably this. And You know what this is like inside of you. Observe your peanut gallery. Celebrate your peanut gallery, but don't believe everything it says. Do not believe everything it says. I can take total responsibility for all the thoughts that trigger all the emotions that run the neurophysiology. I learned this because when I lost that physiology, it was gone. And in order for me to recover and be a normal human being, I had to be like you people. which meant I had to have all the skills and all the abilities that you had. But at the same time, I had to understand that neurocircuitry. And when anger started knocking on my door again, it's like, ooh, anger. And I felt what it felt like in my body, and I didn't like the way that it felt in my body. And I said to that circuitry, no, I don't want to think the thoughts that are going to run that circuitry because I don't like the way that it feels. It's not healthy for me. And so I had to say, I had to be serious with it, and I had to really communicate with it. And the whole last part of the book is all about all of this. So, but I call this tending the garden of your mind. Pay attention to what you're thinking and what thoughts you're growing. It's just circuitry. So shut down that circuitry if you don't want to think those thoughts. How do you do that? You give yourself something else to think about. All of a sudden, taxes become very interesting. You know, whatever it takes. It doesn't matter. Tend the garden of your mind. I can focus my mind. I can focus my mind with conscious intention to choose to behave the head cheerleader of my 50 trillion molecular geniuses. I'm driving down the road and somebody almost hits me. I say, thank you, girls. Thank you, girls. I talk to myself. It was not about that person. I'm a living being capable of having an adrenaline rush when somebody threatens my amygdala. Thank you, girls. It's the difference between where I am today and where I almost didn't have these 10 years of being alive. So I talk to myself all the time. So I'm going to sing you a little song. This isn't my song. I'm getting there. It goes, I just learned this last week in Texas. It goes, every little cell in my body is happy. Every little cell in my body is well. Every little cell in my body is happy. Every little cell in my body is well. I'm so glad every little cell in my body is happy and well. Woo! I mean, how can you not like that? Yeah, almost. Ultimately, I was in charge of my recovery. It was my choice to pay attention, to do what I needed to do, to get the sleep I needed, to pamper myself and my cells, and to believe in myself enough in order to do what I did. So let me sing you a song and then we're out of here. No. Okay, I don't even need that. How exciting, I'm a free girl. Okay. So later, I'm going to talk about this afternoon at the Brain Bank workshop, I'm going to talk about the value of brain donation for research. I'm going to talk about the beauty of the brain and more about why postmortem investigation of the brain is so important. So this piece is titled 1-800-BRAIN-BANK. Oh, I am a brain banker, yes. Banking brains is what I do. Oh, I am a brain banker, asking for a deposit from you. Don't worry, I'm in no hurry. Have you considered the contribution you can make when you are heaven-bound? Your brain can hang around to help humanity find the key to unlock this thing we call insanity. Just dial 1-800-BRAIN-BANK for information, please. Educate, then donate. It's free. Oh, I am a brain banker. Banking brains is what I do. Oh, I am a brain banker, asking for a deposit from you. Yeah, thank you. Thank you. That was fun.
Aspects of my story that are really typical, and then there are aspects of my story that are atypical. And I'm gonna
Come out and represent such a positive, healthy role model of recovery.
We have what we call the Alliance in Billings, which is the 3 major healthcare providers.
The day when he's really alert and can focus on his work. And then somebody this morning talked
into getting the world a better place. And it's both true, because the professionals actually need the resources, the payments.
Some of the policies that we are driving are targeting those kinds of issues, but it's not like it's
analogy as opposed to an electrical line analogy, the circuitry and learning.